Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Tabernacle Township Committee meeting for June 24th, Tuesday for reflection.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. There's sunshine notice. This meeting is called pursuant to the Open Public Meetings Law. This meeting of June the 24th, 2019 was sent to the Central Record, Burlington County Times, and Courier Post. Posted on the bulletin board in Town Hall and has remained increased to post as required notices under the statute. In addition, a copy of this notice is and has been available to the public and is on file in the office of the Mr. Clerk. Roll call. Ms. Brown. Mr. Lee.
Here.
Mr. Moore.
Here.
Mr. Yates.
Yes, here.
Mayor Barton.
Yes,
I will call Kim, she will be attending by phone.
Thank you.
Kim,
Yes,
you ready to start?
okay.
Okay, let the record reflect that Kim Brown is on the phone and we just completed the roll call.
The roll call's complete.
okay, thank you, LaShawn. Good evening, everyone. We do have a resolution that we're going to add to the agenda. It's Resolution 2019-80. It's authorizing the construction official to adjust an account pursuant to Superior Court order of demolition. Basically, what this resolution is that we have a court order to demolish Block 322, Lot 11.02, which is 14 Moore Road. We put it out to bid, and we have a contractor to demolish it. What was not included in the bid was the price for the construction permit. So Resolution 2019-80 is going to waive those fees for the construction permit for the demolition of that property. Does the public have this, LaShawn?
Yes, there's extra
Okay,
copies, so
thanks.
yes.
Okay, then also, there was some additions to the bill list, and does the public have
Yes, they do.
the addition to the bill list? Okay, good. With that, we'll take public comment. Please state your name and address. You have 3 minutes, at which time it will be noticed that you have 30 seconds to conclude your comments. Anyone from the public? Mr. Brooks.
Good evening, committee members. Stuart Brooks, Moore's Meadow Road. 3 comments. First, regarding item 10, indemnification, and also the salary ordinance. When you were discussing the budget, you added $13,000 for special Oprah counsel. I suggested instead that training would be more helpful. Now you're proposing that taxpayers pay a fine that was imposed on an employee who knowingly and willfully failed to file documents which led to an Oprah violation, and you're doing it by finding that there was no willful misconduct or intentional wrong. I mean, there's such a difference between what the consent order says and what your resolution says. I think that's striking. But the point I want to make here is that this was an employee who had a pile of files just going unfiled. Her supervisor, 5 feet away, did nothing to correct it until after the violation. Instead, he actually nominated the employee for an award, and this committee gave a blanket 2% raise. This really is a failure of management here. Oprah compliance isn't that hard when you treat it as a legitimate function of government that has to be effective. And for that reason, there really probably should be disciplinary actions taken for why that filing was left undone. And that's just not, it's not the standard of government service that anyone in this room should accept. I don't see why taxpayers should pay this fine. I'd like to know why. That would be the result of indemnification. And I think you ought to consider disciplinary actions to make sure that there is a level of performance for both the employee and the supervisor. Next comment, regarding the engineer's report, which was going to give direction for road improvements, I'd like to know, I'd like the committee to commit to completing Carranza Road as far as that, as part of that program. I'd also like an answer to a question that Mr. Moore asked at last meeting and I asked as well, and that is there a legal requirement that prohibits the township from bonding for the road improvements to complete Carranza Road? And if there is, can that requirement be cured by entering into a jurisdiction requirement with Shimon? I'm not talking about changing the boundary line, which is where the conversation got shifted. I'm talking about some curative measure that would allow bonding for the road improvements if that's possible. Third, at the last meeting, there regarding Resolution 2019-79, leisure time ends. At the last meeting, Resolution 2019-68 was on the agenda. Mr. Lee asked what this was about. And Mr. Lang, you replied, quote, "This is the issue we talked about." Well, I know that this wasn't talked about at a public meeting, because I attend all the public meetings. There was nothing about leisure time ends that was discussed at a public meeting. So my question is, what was this discussion that was had? When was it had? What was it about? It wasn't public, it seems to be private.
Thank you, Mr. Brooks. Anyone else from the public? Mrs. Brooks?
Are you going to answer any of those questions that he raised?
We'll answer all the questions as we go through our reports.
Fran Brooks, Morris Meadow Road. Good evening, everybody. I also want to touch on the indemnification issue. It's an outrage. This is a woman who, she earns almost $43,000 a year. She can't file basic documents. She had piles of them around her desk, on her desk, under her desk. She should not be indemnified. The taxpayers of Tabernacle should not pick up the cost for her willing and knowingly violation of Oprah. You signed a settlement agreement. You agreed to a settlement agreement. My attorney and Mr. Lang agreed to it with the judge. It seems absolutely wrong to put that cost on taxpayers when she's already earning $43,000 a year and should know how to file, and that it's in a settlement agreement. You should not be indemnifying it, and we should not have to pay for it. In fact, you know, Mr. Boyd earns $93,000 a year. And the fact that he sits 3, maybe 4 feet away from her and didn't manage her, gave her no supervision whatsoever, allowed her to do that, he's as guilty as she is. He's as incompetent as she is. And for those reasons, she shouldn't be indemnified. It's just plain wrong to do that to the taxpayers of Tabernacle. And in addition, Mr. Kramer, you are, as administrator, over $103,000 a year. And where is your supervisory work going on with the construction official who earns $93,000 a year, and making sure that all of your staff is doing what they're supposed to be doing in conformance? It's obvious that there's just terrible mismanagement. And all of you folks are sucking at the public trough with every one of these Oprah problems. All of these Oprah problems are self-inflicted because you're withholding documents. You're having to admit to a penalty that Ms. Love should pay for. And it's all self-inflicted. And it's time to stop it. I don't know whether it's baked into your DNA as elected officials, as staff. I don't know what goes on with you people. But the fact is that you are just sucking up the public trough. And it's totally wrong. The other thing I'd like to raise is, when will Ms. Barber be, according to the settlement agreement, she's going to be providing a retraction of her Oprah harassment statement and characterizing Oprah as harassment. I'd like to know when that written statement is going to be available. So those are the two items that you should not be indemnifying Ms. Love. Someone has to be accountable, and if you guys aren't going to be accountable, and I say guys, you guys aren't going to be accountable, then somebody has to be accountable for this incompetent behavior, not the taxpayers. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, Mr. Wood. Anyone else from the public? Okay, seeing none, we're going to close the public portion. Resolutions. Public comment is a notice of intent to award a contract under the National Cooperative Purchasing Agreement, Sourcewell, formerly National Joint Powers Alliance. 2019-70, authorized award of contract to 100 truck sales and service through the use of Sourcewell, formerly National Joint Powers Alliance. Does anyone from the public want to comment on the purchase of the truck? Okay, seeing none, we'll close the public portion. Motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Roll call?
Ms. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Lee?
Yes.
Mr. Moore?
Yes.
Mr. Yates?
Yes.
Mayor Barton?
Yes. Resolution 2019-71, authorized cancellation of certain property taxes and refund pursuant to a 100% total disabled veteran exemption. Motion.
So moved.
Second.
Kim made it, yes. Joe
Sorry,
second.
who did get the second?
Mr. Yates.
Thank you.
Roll call?
Ms. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Lee?
Yes.
Mr. Moore?
Yes.
Mr. Yates?
Yes.
Mayor Barton?
Yes. 2019-71, for salaries and wages for certain employees and officials for various positions.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call?
Ms. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Lee?
No.
Mr. Moore?
Yes.
Mr. Yates?
Yes.
Mayor Barton?
Yes. 2019-73, approved salaries and wages for municipal court shared service personnel for various positions.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call?
Ms. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Lee?
Yes.
Mr. Moore?
Yes.
Mr. Yates?
Yes.
Mayor Barton?
Yes. 2019-74, authorized the appointment of municipal court judge for court service with Woodland Township. This appointment is to run concurrent with our current 3-year term, which will be up on January 2022. Is that correct? Okay. Have a motion?
Why
So
should we,
moved.
I'll second my question.
Sure.
Why does she have to be, why do we have to go through this resolution?
Currently, municipal division of the Superior Court would like to have a specific appointment for that jurisdiction. It is through the shared service agreement, but it's at the request of the municipal division. It doesn't modify her term.
So does Woodland Township have to take the same kind of action?
Yes.
Okay.
That's my understanding. That's what was explained to me when I asked about the resolution.
Does it allow Judge Downey to resign the bench here and stay in Woodland?
She's actually not resigning the bench here. She's.
I'm just saying hypothetically, does it allow her to be able to resign from here and maintain employment at Woodland?
Sure, she could do that in a
Okay.
future
Okay.
machination that might exist, yeah.
Any other questions? Roll call?
Ms. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Lee?
Yes.
Mr. Moore?
Yes.
Mr. Yates?
Yes.
Mayor Barton?
Yes. 2019-75, approved change order number 2 for the municipal salt shed, Livo Construction Company. So motion.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Dan or Doug will explain the change order.
It's just a deduct. We saved a little bit of money, so the project's finished now, so it's a deduct of $1,000 we were able to save.
Okay, thank you. Roll call?
Yes.
Ms. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Lee?
Yes.
Mr. Moore?
Yes.
Mr. Yates?
Yes.
Mayor Barton?
Yes. 2019-76, authorizing appointment of tax assessor secretary. Have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call?
Ms. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Lee?
Yes.
Mr. Moore?
Yes.
Mr. Yates?
Yes.
Mayor Barton?
Yes. Resolution 2019-77, authorize the cancellation of certain property taxes or refund pursuant to a 100% total disabled veteran exemption. This is for the second quarter, and Mr. Shawn, if I understand this, this is being paid to us automatically when it shouldn't be, is that correct?
Yeah.
Probably through his mortgage. So we owe him a refund, and eventually that'll stop.
And it comes in one large check for both properties, so we can't separate it out.
Okay, so it's one mortgage company that's paying
Paying for a number of
number of
residents-
properties.
Number of properties, so we couldn't separate it out.
And it's done electronically.
Thanks, Beth. Okay, have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Roll call?
Ms. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Lee?
Yes.
Mr. Moore?
Yes.
Mr. Yates?
Yes.
Mayor Barton?
Yes. 2019-78, approved chapter 159 for clean communities. A motion?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call?
Ms. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Lee?
Yes.
Sorry, thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Moore?
Yes.
Mr. Yates?
Yes.
Mayor Barton?
Yes. Resolution 2019-79, approved renewal of preliminary retail consumption license for Windsor Town Inns Incorporated. A motion?
So moved. Brown?
Brown and Lee?
Yep.
Thank you.
Roll call?
Ms. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Lee?
Yes.
Mr. Moore?
Yes.
Mr. Yates?
Yes.
Mayor Barton?
Okay, approval of the bills? Which
We
include-
have resolution 80.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to add on that
Oh, okay,
for
I'm sorry.
demolition.
Yeah, resolution 2019-80, which is the one that I mentioned we would add on, which is authorizing the construction official to adjust the account pursuant to Superior Court order demolition, which basically we're going to waive the construction fee for the demolition. Have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay, roll call?
Thank you. Ms. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Lee?
Yes.
Mr. Moore?
Yes.
Mr. Yates?
Yes.
Mayor Barton?
Yes, thank you, Sean. Approval of the bills, which include the added items. Do a motion?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Roll call?
Ms. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Lee?
Yes.
Mr. Moore?
Yes.
Mr. Yates?
Yes.
Mayor Barton?
Yes. Okay. Approval of the minutes of the April 29, 2019 closed session and the June 10, 2019 regular session minutes.
Mayor, can we separate those two?
Yes, I'm sorry. So we'll do the approval of the mayor 29, 2019 closed session first.
So moved for the 29th.
Second.
Second.
Roll call, Sean.
Thank you. Ms. Brown?
Abstain?
Okay. Mr. Lee?
Yes.
Mr. Moore?
Yes.
Mr. Yates?
Yes.
Mayor Barton?
Yes. Okay, approval of the minutes for the June 10th, 2019 regular session. Motion.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Roll call.
Ms. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Lee?
Yes.
Mr. Moore?
Yes.
Mr. Yates?
Yes.
Mayor Barton?
Yes. Okay, we have listed here under item 7, a discussion about the Verizon Business Personal Property Tax. Verizon had taken a stand back prior to 2015, Doug, that if they were to have less than 51% landlines in Tabernacle Township, they would not owe us the tax, which is called a business professional property tax, which Doug, I think that number was somewhere around $14,000 a year.
Yes.
So they have not paid us that since that point in time. Hopewell Township filed a suit against Verizon. It went to court and Verizon won, and then it went to court a second time, it was overturned. Currently in the legislature, there's a bill from somebody named Bertuccelli down in Paulsboro in Gloucester Township. It's Assembly Bill A5450, which is basically a bill clarifying the legislators' intent when they wrote the bill, that it was for the year, the 51% was for the year that the bill was introduced, for any phone companies that year that had 51% lines would be subject to that tax. And so this new bill basically clarifies their position, reinstating the tax that they were always obligated to pay the tax as long as they had infrastructure in those towns. So we were asked by the New Jersey League of Municipalities to participate in a class action suit, but there's also a bill, A5450, that's working its way. It's actually, I believe, in committee now, that if it goes through and the governor signs it, it also has a retroactive clause in it. It's copied in the back of the book. I contacted Senator Connor's office, and they also, Jason from his office also sent me the same thing, which is in this bill. So, would anybody like to comment on that? And how do we proceed? Do we just wait for the Assembly Bill A5450 to work its way through? Mr. Kramer tells me that we have an appeal every year, right, Doug? That
Yes.
They don't pay the taxes. We've been appealing it, so legally we're in pretty good shape. So do we want to join the New Jersey League of Municipalities lawsuit, which they're asking for $2,000, or let this thing work its way through the Assembly?
I tried to find whether or not there was any reaction from the league yet as it concerns the bill, and it doesn't. I couldn't find any information or get any contact that would explain how that may factor into their decision to go forward with the suit. They appealed to the Supreme Court of the state, given the difference in opinion concerning the trial judge and the appellate division. That'll likely take a long time, a fair amount of time, even on an expedited basis. My suggestion would be that they allow the league to react to this idea that this bill might be curative in some way, and maybe maybe that ask will be withdrawn, or at least understand what might happen from a timing standpoint and how that may affect it over the long term anyway.
Any committee, have any comment on it, or Kim, you have any comment on this?
No.
I think I would wait and see how the process works. It's what somebody's supposed to be doing. I'm not in favor of writing a check for $2,000 for it.
So the bill's the remedy.
Well, that's the
Could
question,
be.
Kim, yeah.
It might be and it might not be, but you've got to have a companion bill, and you also have to get that voted out of committee, and it's got to be posted. There's a lot of work that's got to be done, but I don't see dropping $2,000 and making a statement at the same time to Verizon that says we're in the fight against you. I'm just not sure that this is the time to have that argument.
I'm with you, Stephen. I'm in favor of letting Assembly Bill 5450 work its way through. I mean, John Bertuccelli, been Assemblyman for a long time. He's a pretty sharp guy. He's got a lot of leverage, and hopefully they'll be successful.
It just makes more sense because you're just going to, it can be tied up in court for forever.
Joe, you okay with that?
I'm fine with it.
Work its way through? Okay. We'll close that discussion. Reports. Mr. Guzzi?
A couple things. The community development block ramp project, part of it is the replacement of the ramp and the sidewalk area out front of the municipal building here. That is out to bid and we'll be receiving in July, and hopefully have a recommendation for your July meeting, depending on the the bids and the authorization from the CDBG program. Also, Flat Road, I'm sure you're all aware of the storm damage we had on that. We're working to get a couple different contractors out there to get some numbers for repair, so we can make a determination of what the scope is going to be and how we handle that as far as getting that pipe repaired and the road repaired there. If you've been out there, it's in pretty bad shape, so it's closed right now. Also, the 2019 DOT grants. We talked about it a little bit last week. We had recommended that the committee authorize us to apply to finish Oak Shade Road and then possibly also Prickett's Mill north of Medford Lakes Road in case we get, you know, a large grant and are able to finish Oak Shade and do a little bit more. We're still waiting, as you know, on the Carranza Road discretionary grant application that was submitted, and there should be some movement sometime after July 1st, but we don't have any indication of when that'll happen. So in the meantime, this would be the application for next year's round of funding, which this year we have funding for Oak Shade Road in the first part, phase 1. So we'd like to finish that out and then move to Prickett's Mill.
Okay, and Dan, to add to the Carranza Road, I have a communication in front of me dated June 20th, 2019 from the mayor, the Crocho Shamong. It's a letter that he wrote to the NJ DOT Commission about the grant for Carranza Road. And he's also reached out to the 8th Congressional District, and they're actually copied on this also.
Right, so again, any and all pressure that we can apply to get that grant so that we can get Carranza Road basically paved the entire length of it. That's what we've been working on for a year now, basically, to try to get that.
So the timeline for Flat, are you going to have to bid for what needs to be
So
done?
Flat, once we get the numbers, we're going to make a determination whether that should be done under an emergency situation. But we want to get at least a couple of numbers first, because until we do something, that road's going to remain closed.
Have you engineered the solution to that problem? Have you figured out?
We've been out there. We were out there multiple times the day after. Basically, because the what happened there is there's a 42-inch pipe down, but the water didn't just stay in the pipe. It surcharged, ran down alongside and underneath the pipe, so that all is washed out there. So that section of road has to be cut out basically all the way across, and then more than likely that pipe will have to be replaced. But we haven't been able to get into it, look at it because of the amount of water that's in there. But so that's what we're looking at now, is replacing that pipe and then repaving that section of road, and then along the downstream side where it was all undermined, we have to replace that and reinforce the embankment there.
So it was just the pipe couldn't hold the volume because of the amount of rain we've had?
Correct.
What's the problem? I mean, engineering and design-wise, it would have been fine on a normal.
Well, it's been fine under normal rain circumstances, but there was this, you know, whatever that cell was that parked right on top of that for that period of time. And remember, there's a lot of water because there's a stream that runs through there. And it was more water that can handle, and what you have is that surcharge. So that water was getting impounded there behind that pipe and trying to get through as best as it could, and it ended up just kind of undermining and found other ways to do it. And when it came over the road, it washed out and undermined the other side of the road, like Niagara Falls came over on that. If you were there, I was there in the morning after Doug called me around 8 o'clock, and I mean, there was still a lot of water coming across there. So the answer is, under a normal storm, that would have been fine, but what we have to look at is if we get another repeat of that, we want to make sure whatever fix we design is going to be able to handle. We won't have that same situation where it gets undermined or washed out.
Okay. All right, thank you. Anything else, Dan?
Just as long as I have the committee's authorization to make the application for the DOT grant. We would get a resolution next month, but the applications are due the 20th of July. We won't meet again before they're due. So in order to get them in, I just need to.
Everybody okay with that?
And then what we would do is we'll prepare a resolution that for the agenda next month, just authorizing the formal authorization of the application. That can be submitted to the DOT after the grant application, but we'll get it submitted by the 20th.
Okay, good, thanks.
Thank you.
Mr. Kramer?
We got notice today from the Department of Transportation that our transportation alternate set-aside grant application for the bicycle path along O'Shea Road was denied, and that there was limited funding, and that they will be available next year for us to make application to.
O'Shea Road, right? Which
Yeah,
we're paving O'Shea
we're
Road.
paving O'Shea Road. We went for the DOT grant for the road. We also went for the bike path because we wanted to add bike paths down each side to connect to Medford Lakes Road. And I hope to get enough money to do all of it, but they denied that second grant, so we'll ask for a second grant to finish O'Shea Road this year. And see if we can add the bike path to it once we have that.
Does Shimon have a bike path? They just paved.
They just
O'Shea
paved
Road.
it, they put a shoulder in, but they didn't designate it as a bike path. We have a fair amount of residents along our section of O'Shea Road that the children either go to the park or they ride to school at certain times of the year. And we have a bike path from Medford Lakes Road connecting all the way across here to the school. We were just trying to add to that some additional protection.
So when we pave the road, are we gonna do the bike path or not?
We'll do the width out, and depending on where we are with the next grant, we'll see how we're going to strike it.
What kind of grant do you need to strike the road?
We asked for, we asked to widen the road to the path, the width we need to add the bike path,
Okay.
is what we're at. We'll probably do the width that we need to do so we can add it once we get our second.
But if you have, the width of the road's not gonna change, right?
Well, certain places it will.
Okay.
We have some areas that have been narrowed up, so
I guess my point is, if you're gonna strike the road anyway, why not just strike it to include a bike path?
we
Well,
will.
we could do that, the grant was just additional monies that we'd be able to use to widen the road, sort of in addition to.
I get that part. I guess my point is that if you're gonna strike the road anyway, the areas, at least that you're not gonna
As long as we have the width, we can do
have
that.
a wider piece, yeah. I just think it's silly to strike it twice, is the point.
Yeah. We have been, Public Works Department along with the Fire Department react to the storm. Fire Company along with the Fire Police were out closed roads on the night of the storm. 532 had a couple of closures. New Road had a closure at the time, and Flyett Road was one they closed also. Public Works has worked the last few days addressing the areas that we can. Some potholes, we have some drains that have to have some repairs. We've done some of them, we have more to do. We'll be working on that the rest of this week. We also are now in possession of Woodland Township's court records. They've been moved to here, so we are moving forward on the court consolidation. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Kramer. Mr. Lane?
Mayor, I'm going to save my time for executive session.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Committeeman Yates?
At the last meeting, I brought to everyone's attention that, and congratulated Mr. Sunbury, with the position of emergency management coordinator. What did we discover?
I did not include that issue at this time. I had a lot going on last week, and I did not get to answering that question. Mr. Sunbury was going to reach out, I think, to some professionals in that area and at the county who might have some information on that. I have heard that there was a position out there, although I haven't been provided any authority, concerning the incompatibility or potential compatibility of those offices from a statutory standpoint. I looked at the statute, I didn't see anything in the statute. So that would require me to look at what's called the office compatibility statute and do a little research under that. And I'll expedite getting that done, but last week was consumed with some other things that we're going to be talking about in executive session.
Like I said, I just want to be proactive on this issue.
I will certainly be in a position to respond at the next meeting.
Anything else, Jeff?
That's it.
Been late.
Mayor, to piggyback on that, at this point, I'd like to make a motion that we begin the search process for an emergency management coordinator. I think there are two positions that need to be separate. I clearly believe that Mr. Sunbury can do both jobs. However, I'm not sure that that's the best move in the interest of the township, the taxpayers. So at this point, I'm going to make a motion that we begin the process of hiring or advertising for a new emergency management coordinator. And I'll ask for a second from my colleagues. And ask for a call for a vote.
Second.
Any discussion?
Can I just clarify that?
Yes, Kim?
I just want to make sure I heard, because it broke up a little bit, that Mr. Lee's made a motion to begin a search to look for a emergency management coordinator.
To advertise, Kim, to advertise the position to begin the search, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And there was a motion and a second, correct?
Yes.
Well, as I understood the motion, it was for a finding that irrespective of what the conflict resolution would be, irrespective of any legal opinion, that you're making that motion.
That is correct, meaning that I'm not interested in finding out a legal opinion. I'd like to begin the process of searching for a new emergency management coordinator.
I'm sorry, Joe, if you could just repeat what Stephen's saying, because he's breaking up. I'm sorry.
Yeah, what Stephen is saying, that irrespective of what Peter's findings are from a legal perspective, that he would want to proceed with an advertising and a search regardless of whether legally Mr. Sunbury could hold two positions or not. Is that accurate?
Yes, I just also include that I would like to hire the person that we select. So all three components.
And I'll,
Can you repeat that too, please?
Yes, what he would like to do is advertise, interview, and hire.
Right now, you have someone in the
Right.
position, so there would be
It
an
would be
issue.
a job offer, I guess, at the right time.
Yeah, I'm gonna sit over next to you for a second, so Kim can hear me. Can you hear me?
I can now. You were just breaking up, that was my problem.
How you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Recognize that Mr. Sunbury has won the election in the primary election, and he could potentially be winning the election in November. That will put us in a position where we need to, as far as I'm concerned, we need to hire a new emergency management coordinator. To assist in that transitional period, I would like to make a motion that we advertise and we interview and we potentially hire a new emergency management coordinator with the assumption that Mr. Sunbury is going to win the general election in November. That position, although would not take effect until the end of 2000 or the beginning of 2020, I think it's important to have that process in place so there can be a transitional period for Mr. Sunbury and the new individual.
Okay.
Did I miss
I
anything?
just wanted to clarify exactly what you were saying.
Did you hear all that?
I did hear all that, thank you
All right,
very much.
I'm going to
and Mayor.
And Joe, I'm sorry. And Joe seconded that, by the way, I think.
Joe Yates.
And, coming from the background, pending Mr. Sunbury wins the November election, I am in agreement. I think it needs to be two separate positions. Pending he wins the election, the general election part of it.
Well, myself, my position is I would like to know if legally Mr. Sunbury or anybody could serve both those positions. But with that, and I'm not opposed to, if that's possible, Mr. Sunbury serving both those positions, but with that, I think we all had our say, we'll call for a vote. Roll call, Ms. Jones.
Thank you, Ms. Brown.
Yes.
Mr. Lee.
Yes.
Mr. Moore.
Yes.
Mr. Yates.
Yes.
Mayor Barton.
No.
Mayor, the other thing I wanted to touch base on, kind of piggybacking on emergency management for a second. Bob, where do we stand with the whole Eucharist discussions in regards to our new ordinance and public events and whatnot? How's that going?
Come on.
Absolutely. For the record, we've got Bob Sunbury, emergency management coordinator.
Were you able to hear that, Kim?
Yes.
In my hand, I have the application for Holy Eucharist Festival along with the check as required. It has been submitted to the clerk and I'm reviewing the application in accordance with our new ordinance. So that is this package right here.
Any further questions?
If Bob has anything else for us.
Thank you, Bob.
Thanks, Bob. I also want to say best of luck to the municipality in this transition to board down the Woodland Township. That was clearly a long process, and I'm hopeful that things work out in the long run for both Woodland and for most especially Tabernacle. I went to Trenton this past Monday to testify in the Senate Environment Committee hearing, and evidently the state of New Jersey is interested in regulating pesticide usage in New Jersey, which is something that's unprecedented. It's happened before with one material in California and also in New York, and the state feels as though that they can do a better job of managing pesticides than New Jersey can, or that the federal government can. What's unfortunate is that I went up and was not allowed time to testify because they had to go to a budget hearing meeting. So just more of an FYI that that's something that's on the radar mainly for farmers here in Tabernacle. It's official. We finally have the first installations for fiber in Tabernacle. In fact, this week is when the installations are happening. Tomorrow, as far as I know, tomorrow on Powell Place Road specifically is where some of the installations are happening. There may be some knocks on the door. Please sign up for FIOS for those who haven't done that already. But that the beginning of phase 1 started actually on Friday, and it'll be hot and heavy this week over on Powell Place Road.
Stephen, have you heard about whether Verizon is providing voice, television, and internet?
They are providing voice and data only.
No
video.
TV, no video.
No television. But from what I understand, the folks that sell FIOS have been told that the municipality is the one that determines whether or not you get television or not. And that's not the case. Verizon makes a decision, a business decision, whether or not they provide video feed to the FIOS customers. So that's entirely up to them. There's nothing that, the township's got nothing to do with it. It's all a business decision that Verizon does. And literally, all that's involved is turning the signal on and running a coaxial cable into your Verizon box, and that's all that's required. So, unfortunately, as I understand it, there's only voice and data. And when you go to when you're able to, in phase 2 or phase 3 or phase 4, when you go to place your order, they will tell you that. They will say you've only got voice and data. Now, I pushed Verizon a little bit on that. They said it's a business decision which we're looking into, but that's as far as I've gotten so far.
So what they're telling our residents is that it's the township that has to tell them that.
Apparently they are.
Yes, that was my phone call today.
Yeah, and that's absolutely not the case.
Okay.
That's a Verizon decision. And I don't know, I mean, there's not a whole lot that we can do about it, to my knowledge. I pushed for all 3 10 months ago, but it's a business decision that they made.
I haven't read the ordinance recently, but I know that we have an ordinance with Comcast identified in language in the ordinance, right, Doug?
Yes.
And I wonder if that's something that they're using by saying that we're the ones that are watching the video, not them. And what I would ask is, can we take a look at that ordinance and assure ourselves that we aren't impeding them from offering that video service?
That's you mean the Comcast ordinance?
Yeah.
There's nothing in there. I I've got a copy of it at home, but I don't think there's anything in there that designates Comcast as the sole provider. I don't think we have anything in the resolution that determines that, but there's an agreement that we have with Comcast that allows them access for right-of-way to put the lines up.
Yeah. Contractor provides the service.
There's some language in there about territory for cable television and the statute, so it's something to look at. I mean, I can quickly take a look at it.
I've got a copy of the ordinance at home. I mean, I can dig it up.
I'd just like to have an opinion that we're not precluding that, and that it's their business case, because I find it strange that they wouldn't want to offer a third service. You know,
I
to put
think
all the
they-
infrastructure in place, why would you not want to generate revenue from a third stream?
The word I got was that they're mad at us because,
Kind of sounds it, right?
yeah, because they're you know, we held their feet to the fire, so, that's just, you know, line crew hearsay, but it would be worthwhile looking at the Comcast ordinance, because if that's the case, then we need to fix that.
I would do so, thank you.
Okay. And I think that's all I got.
Thank you. Committed more?
Yeah, the one thing I want to add, just to keep on about Corinza Road, if we can, if this DOT grant goes through, let's start looking at the other alternatives that we discussed, you know, that I brought up last time, if we can, you know, about the jurisdiction, what have you, so we can keep pressing along. It's long overdue, let's just get it done. However, we got to make it work, you know, that's reasonable and fair that we can if this grant does not go through. That's all I have.
Deputy Mayor Brown?
I don't have anything, thank you. I appreciate being allowed to call in. Unfortunately, circumstances did not allow me to be there in person tonight.
We understand, Tim, and thanks for calling in. Okay, with that, the only thing I have to report is last week I had the honor and privilege of being at the 8th grade graduation, where Commitment Lee's son graduated the 8th grade, so it's good to see Patrick there. And Stephen presented his son with his diploma, and it was a good evening in Tabernacle. And Stephen, I'd say I got out there just in time. I was about 5 steps from my car when the downpour came in. I don't know if you were so lucky. But, other than that, we're going to go into closed session. Yeah, we're a motion to go into closed session.
Second.
And that's to discuss litigation involving Fran Brooks versus Township of Tabernacle, docket number BRL 1048, as an exception, and will be discussed in executive session.
Roll call, Ms. Trump?
Ms. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Lee?
Yes, but I have a question.
Mr. Moore?
Yes.
Mr. Yates?
Yes.
Mayor Barton?
Yes.
Are we intentionally going into executive session before public comment? Is that,
Yes.
Is that by design?
Yes, because afterwards, we may have 2 resolutions, Stephen, and then
okay.
we'll do a public comment before we adjourn.
Okay.
Okay, with that, we'll go with executive session, we'll be downstairs, everyone's welcome to stay put. Hopefully we won't be too long.
I'll leave you down there.
Yes.
Hang up and you can call me back.
First thing in the morning?
How bad is it?
I don't know. All in another order together anymore?
Anytime. Because I always have them held over.
Yeah. Is the vote final yet?
Okay.
Yes,
that's fine.
What's that?
Whatever, just shoot me a text so I know.
Yeah,
It's not a problem. Yeah, yeah, but if you want boxes, let me know, but I don't keep doing it.
recount?
Yeah,
Where you're at. I always like teachers out there.
I know one's
By
double.
11:30?
Yeah, that's fine. You just have to, just a little header, I'll have it ready. Yeah. So I just will sit and use cardboard boxes 10 pounds for a while. And then we'll have to rerun them again. Yeah. Nobody uses them after a day. Yeah. No, that's no big deal. That's all. That's simple. I just cut them on the end, I don't have to change nothing over. Right. Sweet.
And so if I do lose it, it's my own fault because I didn't camp it. So I have nobody to blame but myself.
So if I so they would know if you're not missing, I mean, like you have to use one.
Me?
Yeah.
Because it couldn't have been a deadlock. And we're still in limbo.
Right.
I hate lemon and I like lemonade, but I can't stand lemon and
I like it because it gives it that flavor.
I love lemon rice. Lemonade, so I can't stand water. Can't stand lemon.
Now see, I like it because it might have a flavor.
It's like, you know, when they put lemon on the side. That's bad. I don't like lemon on my seafood.
They'll take it.
They won't put it on the side, they always put it on. That's because I like it.
Couldn't you leave it?
And leave it for me.
We're back in regular session.
You need a motion for that, Joe?
Hold on 1 second. Yeah, Jerry.
Hello, Kim, we're back upstairs.
Okay, we have Resolution 2019-81, which is approving the settlement agreement pursuant to a consent order. The motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second. Any discussion required? Hearing none, roll call.
Ms. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Lee?
Yes.
Mr. Moore?
Yes.
Mr. Yates?
Yes.
Mayor Barton?
Yes. Resolution 2019-82, approving a resolution providing indemnification for Section 12 of the revised general ordinances of the Township of Tabernacle. The motion?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, roll call.
Miss Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Lee?
Yes.
Mr. Moore?
Yes.
Mr. Yates?
Yes.
Mayor Barton?
Yes. We're item 11, we already approved the added bills, is that correct?
Well, we're doing the added bill list for the two payments, the one dealing with the identification.
And the one dealing with the settlement.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
That was
Okay,
separate.
and they're right here. Everybody have those bills? Okay.
Could you tell them to me?
You want to read them too? Okay.
Kim, they're the bills in furtherance of the settlement.
Okay, thank you.
Roll call?
I need a motion, I'm sorry.
We had a motion, didn't we?
I must have missed that.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're right. Yeah, I had a wrong assumption. So this is approval of the added bills from the settlement, which is a bill for $13,500, Kim, to Mr. Lures, and a bill for $1,000 to the Treasury of the State of New Jersey. The motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Roll call?
Ms. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Lee?
Yes.
Mr. Moore?
Yes.
Mr. Yates?
Yes.
Mayor Barton?
Yes. Okay. As far as the part of the settlement requires a ordinance, and Peter will have that ordinance available for next meeting, Peter?
Yes,
Is that correct? And it also requires a retraction statement, which will be worked on with our attorney and our clerk.
Correct.
With that, we're going to open up to the public. Anyone else from the public would like to speak, please raise your hand. Mr. Brooks?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Stuart Brooks, Moore's Meadow Road. I understood, Mr. Mayor, that questions are going to be answered in the report section. This is the third time I've asked a question about what legal impediments there seem to be regarding the spending of Tabernacle bond money to improve Carranza Road. I know Committeeman Moore has asked once already. That question is still out there. I don't understand why citizens can't get an answer to this basic question. More fundamental is, what commitment is the committee making to complete Carranza Road? Given the subset of that is, given the inadequacies of the pending grant to DOT, which I went through at length last meeting, and particularly our request for roughly 1/3 of their annual budget, which makes it seem unlikely that it's going to be approved. What action are you going to take? Would you consider, have you considered withdrawing that application, rewriting a stronger application, and reducing the scope to go to Moore's Meadow Road only, which is the last residential street in town? It's only 6/10 of a mile. It's far less than what was asked for. I haven't heard any concrete proposals for completing Carranza Road. Committeeman Moore, I know that you're active and you say you're active in pursuing this, but I just don't hear the committee taking up that call to action. Second, I'd like to return to the indemnification agreement. I see this as a management problem, fundamentally. I don't understand why this committee or this township is so averse in general to transparency. Other agencies that I've worked with and other agencies that I've had Oprahs with don't seem to have the antipathy or the difficulty in fulfilling Oprah requests. It's an attitude issue. The attitude that's right, in my opinion, is public records belong to the public. A request comes in, the records go out. By and large, there are not that many problems in reducing public records, but in Tabernacle, it seems like there's an inordinate number of problems, and that's why there's so much litigation. Again, I don't think the answer is to spend money on special counsel. I think the answer is in training, filing, having performance standards that actually set a reasonable bar for what your employees are supposed to do. Last question. When the first section of Carranza Road was repaved, there were millings from the old asphalt that was milled up. Some of those millings were given to Shamong residents. Question is, did we get a credit for the disposal of those?
30 seconds are up, Mr.
I thought I was getting 30 seconds to finish up. Did we get a credit for the disposal of those millings that didn't have to take place? Second question, is it legal to place millings within the pine lands? That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brooks.
You want to answer the questions?
We'll come before the end of the night.
Great, thank you.
Anyone else from the public? Mrs. Brooks?
Yeah, it's pretty disturbing, Fran Brooks, Moore's Meadow Road, it's pretty disturbing to hear that you're gonna file DOT grants when you have only 6/10 of a mile to finish to Moore's Meadow Road. The entire 3 miles doesn't have to be finished to the railroad. There's nothing wrong with that road. And it's almost as if it was done to obstruct the completion of the road. It'd be nice to hear a little bit more background work on your part, Mr. Moore, regarding the finishing that last 6/10 of a road.
I'd suggested actually that we do it to the railroad tracks because it makes sense as you do a road to do.
It doesn't make sense, it's 3
Well,
miles.
that's an
and-
opinion,
and
but I'm
It's
just-
not
I
an
wanted-
opinion, they
I wanted
only
to
have
tell
about
you-
$8 million there. You
Just to be
can't
clear,
$3 million.
Just to be clear, we didn't say go to the railroad track just because we felt like it. We did it because it made sense.
But it doesn't make sense because that road is in pretty good, the road bed is in very good condition for the most part. And it's nothing, it's been paved multiple times over the 35 years where the remaining
No, it hasn't.
Carranza has, I know it
That's
hasn't.
okay.
And the remaining part of Carranza Road hasn't been paved, okay? For over 35 years, and the road shows that. So why is it that you put in a grant for $3 million? It's impossible to get that, it's unlikely you're gonna get that given the availability of the funds under that local infrastructure. And all we need is 6/10, but you're talking about finishing other roads that have been repeatedly repaved instead of really doing the job you're supposed to do. There's just simply no accountability whatsoever. We pay you $5,000 and there's no accountability whatsoever in any shape, way, or form. The indemnification is an outrage to put that on taxpayers, when in fact there's no management. $93,000 to our construction official, $103,000 to our administrator, and there's no accountability whatsoever coming from the committee or from the staff. Having said that, the last comment I have to make is some months ago, Mayor Barton, you said you were going to work on improving the bills, Mr. Lang's bills. There's been relatively no improvement in those bills. There's no conformance with the OIG, the Office of Inspector General's Legal Services Report. I'd like to know, Mr. Lang, why is it that you charge Tabernacle an administrative fee, which is really verboten under the OIG report, but you don't charge Bass River an administrative fee, which, by the way, just for the record, is 9%. So it would be nice to understand why you do that. You charge us, but you don't charge them. There's no consistency. There's block billing, which is also verboten. You don't record the amount of time that you spend on each service or task. You don't even explain each service or task because everything is block billed. And you don't itemize your expenses. It is virtually impossible, I have 30 seconds, it's virtually impossible for citizens to know, to determine whether your charges are really appropriate. And it never will be, we will never be able to determine the appropriateness of your charges and the validity of your charges, which is what that OIG report was all about, until this committee takes control of the invoice issue. And again, it's another thing of sucking up the public trough, and no accountability.
Anyone else from the public? Doug, our engineer's not here as far as millings.
Millings are supposed to be taken back to recycle. I can speak to them about what they did with them. We did not accept them, because we've never got approval to use them in the pilings. Other communities have. I know Southampton's got approval, I'm assuming Chemung has, but we've never approached it because we don't prefer to use them.
Okay, so in our contract, the contractor's supposed to,
They were the contractor's responsibility.
they're his responsibility.
Yes. And they have to take a certain percentage back because of the percentage of recycled asphalt they have to use in the farming.
So how do we police that in the future? Maybe it's a question for Dan, maybe you can talk to him about, how do we assure in the future that the millings are handled properly, that they do go where they're supposed to go, and they don't go to a third party, maybe in a location where they're not permitted to be?
Joe, all you have to do is ask for the ticket, copies of the tickets.
I'll talk to Dan.
Okay, good. Okay, motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. I hear you say aye, Kim. Good night.
Yes.
Good night, Kim.
Thank you. Good night, Ken.
Aye.
Joe? Yes, first question.
Okay.
Okay.
Is there, actually, I'm supposed to,
I'll be in the construction meeting.